There are moments in life when the heavens seem quiet, the earth feels heavy, and every step forward comes with the weight of unspoken pain. These are not the celebrated stages of success, nor are they marked by applause or validation. Instead, they are the hidden seasons, where loyalty is tested in isolation, where silence replaces answers, and where tears speak prayers no words could form. You know those times. The nights when your loyalty was misunderstood, when you chose integrity over attention, when you stayed faithful though your soul felt forgotten. You didn't retaliate. You didn't shout for justice. You didn't explain yourself to those who couldn't hear the language of your loyalty. You chose silence. Not because you were weak, but because you trusted that God was keeping the record. And what of the tears? The ones no one saw, the ones you cried not for sympathy, but in surrender. Those tears were offerings. They watered the soil of your future, though you didn't even realize it. You passed tests that didn't come with instructions. You endured seasons that felt like wilderness. Yet in the unseen realm, you were being measured, honored and prepared. God is so pleased, not because you were perfect, but because you were loyal when betrayal was easier, silent when slander was loud, and faithful when it would have been easier to flee. You didn't fold, you didn't forget who you were, and you didn't forfeit the calling God placed upon your life. The greatest tests are often silent. They do not announce themselves with fanfare or clarity. They hide in the folds of ordinary days. But you passed them. You didn't just pass. You honored heaven in how you did it. And now, the reward is not just in what's ahead. The reward is in knowing that God saw every tear, heard every unspoken word, and counted every act of unseen obedience. Yes, God is pleased, deeply, eternally, and what comes next is not just a blessing. It's a vindication of your quiet loyalty, your sacred silence, and your holy tears. There is a peculiar kind of obedience that flourishes when the sun is out. When the reward is visible, the path is clear, and the affirmation of others warms the heart. It is good and noble to obey then, but far more precious to God is the loyalty that remains when the lights go out. When no one is watching, no one is clapping, and even heaven seems hidden behind thick clouds of silence. Loyalty in the dark. That is the rarest gold of faith. It is easy to walk the road of obedience when every step is confirmed by signs and wonders, when blessings trail behind your faith like breadcrumbs on the path. But what about when there is no sign, no voice, no evidence that your sacrifice is being noticed? What about when your faithfulness is met only with delay, and your devotion with disappointment? That is where loyalty is tested, and that is where it becomes holy. You see, God is not simply measuring behavior. He is measuring allegiance. Obedience in the light may impress men, but loyalty in the dark moves heaven. When you choose Him while walking through shadows, when you remain faithful though the reward is nowhere in sight, you're echoing the very heart of Christ, who trusted the Father even in Gethsemane's silence and on Calvary's cross. Loyalty in the dark means holding fast to a God who seems distant, still trusting a plan you cannot see, still standing on a promise not yet fulfilled. It means continuing in prayer when the heavens are closed, staying pure when no one's affirming you, and loving the unlovable without recognition or repayment. It is not loud. It does not post itself for admiration, but it is deeply seen by the one who matters most. And here is the mystery. Those who are loyal in the dark are often the ones God chooses to honor in the light. Not because they earned it, but because they proved they would never trade devotion for display. They didn't worship for favor. They worshipped because He was worthy, even when they were wounded. You may be in such a season now. If so, let me tell you this: God sees your loyalty. He is not silent because He is absent. He is silent because He is watching, and what you are building in the dark will stand when others collapse in the light. Let others obey when it's easy, but you are called to be loyal when it costs something, and heaven is taking note. We live in an age where noise is power, where the loudest voices often rise fastest, and silence is mistaken for weakness. Everyone has something to say. Opinions are broadcast before thoughts are formed, and reactions replace reflection. In such a world, silence can feel like surrender. But make no mistake, silence is not weakness. Silence is warfare. There is a silence that is sacred, not born out of fear, but out of faith. A silence that refuses to defend itself because it knows God is already doing that behind the veil. A silence that lets the noise pass overhead like wind, not because it agrees with the storm, but because it is anchored deeper than sound can reach. There are moments in the life of the believer where words would only dilute the strength of what God is doing. You could explain yourself, you could fight back, you could correct the lies, shout down the slander, and prove your point. But heaven doesn't always call for an argument. Sometimes it calls for stillness, for silence, for trust. Think of Christ before Pilate. The crowds roared, the accusations flew, but the one with all the power stood silent, not because he had nothing to say, but because what he carried was too sacred to argue about. That kind of silence is not passive. It's holy. It's heavy. It is power under control. When you choose silence in a moment that invites retaliation, you are waging war on your flesh. You're crucifying pride. You're resisting the temptation to be seen, to be heard, to be right. And instead, you are saying, God, I trust you to speak for me. I don't need to fight this. I need to stay faithful. There are battles that can only be won in silence, not because God is inactive, but because your stillness is the invitation for him to act. Your restraint becomes a statement, I'm not controlled by this world's chaos. I'm governed by heaven. Silence is not a void. It is a vessel, full of waiting, full of wisdom, full of God, and in that quiet he speaks, not with volume, but with clarity, not with applause, but with authority. So the next time you are tempted to fight with words, remember, silence is a spiritual weapon. The world shouts to win, but heaven watches for the one who stands still and lets the Lord do the talking. There are prayers you speak aloud, crafted with words, shaped with theology, adorned with scripture. And then there are the prayers that break past language. The ones that fall from your eyes, not your lips. The ones that don't rise up like incense, but fall down like rain. Tears, they are the soul's native tongue. The language of ache, of surrender, of worship too deep to name. Tears are not weakness. They are not the failure of faith. They are faith's fiercest form, when words fail but trust remains. When you no longer know what to say to God, but your heart still turns toward him with every drop that falls. These are not wasted. These are not forgotten. These are liquid prayers, and heaven bottles every one. The scriptures tell us that God collects our tears in a bottle. Psalm 56:8. This is no metaphor to make us feel better. This is divine reality. The Almighty is not disinterested in your pain. He doesn't rush past it to get to your praise. No, he pauses in your sorrow, kneels beside you, and gathers what no one else sees. Each tear is a testimony of love that hurt, of hope that stretched too far, of loss that echoed longer than expected. But even more, every tear is a seed, planted in the soil of suffering and destined to bloom in the garden of redemption. For those who sow in tears will reap in joy, Psalm 136:5. This is not poetic comfort. This is holy promise. God does not just respond to strength. He responds to surrender, and tears are the surrender of the heart. They say, I can't carry this, Lord, but I trust you will. They are the prayers you never meant to pray, and the ones that reach his throne with no interference. Some of the greatest shifts in your life began with tears. Quiet, unnoticed moments when no one clapped, no one saw. But heaven did. You thought you were just breaking, but you were birthing something eternal, something sacred. So cry if you must. Cry in trust. Cry in worship. Cry in weariness, knowing that not one tear goes unseen, unheard, or unloved. Your tears do more than express emotion. They move the heart of God, and in time the tears that fell in sorrow will rise again, not as reminders of pain, but as markers of grace. Life does not always announce its turning points. The most significant moments often arrive disguised in the ordinary. No spotlight, no trumpet, just a quiet moment, an unseen choice, a test tucked inside your Tuesday. These are the hardest tests, not because they are dramatic, but because they are hidden. There is no crowd watching, no voice affirming, no sign saying, this is the test that will define your destiny. And yet it is. The hardest tests come silently. They do not knock politely or give you time to prepare. They appear in the form of a misunderstood conversation, an unfair accusation, a prolonged delay, or an unnoticed act of kindness. These tests do not ask how gifted you are, how many scriptures you know, or how eloquently you pray. They ask something far deeper. Will you still choose love when it's not returned? Will you still serve when no one claps? Will you still forgive when no one says thank you? They are quiet crucibles. No one else may ever know you faced them, but heaven will, because these are the moments that form the soul. They burn away pretense, strip down pride, and reveal who you really are when the lights are off and no one is watching. And perhaps the most difficult part, there is no applause. You don't get celebrated for the kindness you chose in private. No one throws you a party because you stayed faithful in a dry season. The world cheers for visible wins, but God crowns secret obedience. Do not mistake the absence of applause for the absence of impact. In the kingdom of God, what is unseen is often the most powerful. Obedience in obscurity is not wasted, it's weighted. It adds weight to your walk, depth to your character, and authority to your voice. And when the time is right, what was tested in silence will be rewarded in light. You may not have known the test was even happening. You may look back and realize, that was the moment, and I almost missed it. But grace met you, grace strengthened you, and whether you realized it or not, you passed. You didn't pass by performing. You passed by staying, by trusting, by holding your tongue, by keeping your word, by not quitting. And God took note, even when no one else did. So now, walk with quiet confidence. You've been tested in the invisible. And that kind of testing always precedes divine promotion. You don't need the applause of men when heaven is already standing. There is a kind of favor that does not come through fame, talent, or applause. It is not earned through eloquence or strategy. It comes wrapped in mystery, born in secret places, cultivated in the dark soil of suffering. This kind of favor does not chase those who merely succeed. It rests upon those who remained faithful when success was absent. Faithfulness in suffering, that is heaven's magnet. Not flashy endurance, not loud declarations, but quiet, consistent obedience when life hurts and God feels far. When everything in you says, give up, but something eternal in you says, hold on. That is where favor begins to form, in the furnace. You see, anyone can sing when the sun is shining. Anyone can obey when the road is smooth. But when the sky turns black and the answers delay, when prayers feel like echoes and hope stretches thin, what do you do then? Those are the sacred moments. That is when faith becomes fragrant, and that fragrance rises to the throne of God like a rare offering. God is not looking for perfect performance. He is drawn to persistent devotion, not the kind that shouts, but the kind that stays. You may feel forgotten. You may think nothing is happening. But in truth, you are being watched by heaven, and heaven is moved. Every time you chose to worship in pain, you struck a chord that echoed beyond this world. Every tear you wept in trust became a river that heaven remembers. Every time you walked in integrity while carrying sorrow, you marked yourself with divine favor. Not the favor that flatters, the favor that anoints. It is a favor that Joseph found in the pit, that David discovered in the cave, that Esther carried into the throne room. A favor that cannot be earned, only revealed. Through fire, through silence, through struggle, and when that favor rests on you, doors open that no man can shut, not because you are skilled, but because you are sealed by the one who saw you suffer, and still saw you serve. You didn't waste your suffering, you worshipped through it. And now the fragrance of that faithfulness is calling favor into your future. You won't have to chase it. It will recognize you. Because favor knows the scent of loyalty forged in pain, and heaven never forgets who stayed faithful when it hurt the most. There are chapters in your life that feel hollow, quiet seasons, long nights, days that pass without progress, prayers that seem unanswered, and faithfulness that feels invisible. You show up, you serve, you stay, and still the silence deepens. Heaven doesn't seem to speak. People overlook you, and somewhere deep inside, you begin to wonder, have I been forgotten? But here is a holy truth: you were never forgotten. You were being watched, not watched in judgment, not under a microscope of shame. You were being watched the way a gardener watches soil before the sprouting. The way a king watches a warrior in training. The way a father watches a child take steps in the dark, not to punish, but to prepare. You were under observation, not for disqualification, but for elevation. God often watches in silence to see what will emerge in your soul, not to test your ability, but to reveal your loyalty. When the applause stops, when the light dims, when no one sees the sacrifice, the staying power, the quiet yes in your spirit, He sees it all. In fact, some of your most powerful moments weren't public. They weren't even noticed by those closest to you. But heaven recorded them. Angels leaned in. The Father smiled. You were being shaped in a hidden place, for a stage you didn't even know was coming. Promotion in the kingdom is never random. It's revealed after observation. You didn't know it, but your patience was preaching. Your obedience was a declaration. Your endurance under pressure was a message to the unseen realm. I am still faithful. And God took note. Just because the room was empty didn't mean your value diminished. Just because the season felt dry doesn't mean fruit wasn't forming. You thought you were overlooked, but you were being studied. Your character was being weighed. Your motives were being refined. Your future was being written by a God who saw every tear you didn't tell anyone about. So now, when favor begins to fall, when the doors open, when the ones who ignored you try to understand the sudden shift, you'll know the truth. This didn't come from the crowd. It came from the eyes that never left you. You were being watched when you thought you were forgotten. And now, the one who saw your quiet faithfulness is about to reveal you, not to prove anything to people, but to fulfill everything He promised.